Hey. Hello.
I can be even louder, or yes. So thank you again, dear guests, sitting with us today, but also the ones who are watching us from the screens. We are really honored that you took the time to join us, also to kind of trust us to join us at the tea ceremony, which maybe it's something that it's not really a normal thing to experience before some sort of parliaments that we're trying to unfold right now. But yes, again, we're happy to host you at the Regenerative Center Krater, Design Center Krater, in particular at our new rendered pavilion. So the place, as you probably already know, was built during the design biennial Bio 27. It was also set up to encourage conversations about building with locally sourced matter. It was kind of urgent for us to call this assembly the second we learned that engaging with materials at Krater, such as invasive plants, local earth, and also mycelium, is de facto forbidden. So, as it seems, our current legislation is turning our landscapes into forbidden vernaculars. So from the conference rooms to the parliaments, we want to bring this important debate to Krater's production laboratory. This rewilded construction site next to the city center of Ljubljana stimulated us to imagine new protocols and aesthetics for hosting and homing such political conversations. Here, decision makers, designers, practitioners, soil organisms, plants, and others can come together to feel, touch, and fully situate in the possibilities and the challenges germinating from our broken lands. Most of us live in increasingly paved over, smart urbanized areas. Alienated from vernacular qualities of the space, we seem to successfully ignore the abundance of resources that our localities indeed offer. So by forgetting to cultivate reciprocal relationships with our lands, we continuously reinforce the polarities between ecology and economy, the state and the community, the practice and the law. And to bridge those broken bonds, we were during the last months investing our sweat and time to set up this vernacular tea ceremony. The pavilion made from the soil, the vessels, as you could see, made from the wild clay. The herbal tea and the mycelium packaging are all harvested and produced on the site. While designing this landscape-based scenography, we engaged in the process of collecting matter, working with hands, playing with dirt, a process without a real scientific value. Yet such gestures help us seal the luring void between the building and its inhabitant, the architecture and its planner, the land and its vibrant matter. They can assist us in rebuilding a sense of connection and belonging. The project also asked us to connect with a group of translocal practitioners, which already gained the wisdom of the locality. While seeking advice for building our tea pavilion, we have learned about the myriad of struggles they need to tackle to be able to work with locally sourced matter. The overly complicated legislation and the lack of administrative support forces them to seek less sustainable solutions. The costly process of certification disables them to work with local wood, clay, and fibers. If they want to work with natural materials, they need to buy them from abroad. Mobilizing the visibility of the biennial gave us the opportunity to push the possibilities for building and designing with local, healthy, and reusable materials away from its margins straight to the center of the conversation. On the same hand, we are well aware that the increase in their popularity could be incredibly harmful. To stop the extractive approaches to our ecosystems, we believe it is more than necessary to envision these renewable materials not as commodities for making profits, but rather as limited resources for housing our degrowth societies. For this reason, it is especially important for us that we could frame this debate in an administrative framework. With our dear guests who exhibited the willingness and the readiness to discuss, we will hopefully learn about its current constraints and test its openness for regenerative approaches to our building and planning practices. To be able to spread the learnings and concerns across the borders of Slovenia, we decided to set this conversation in a link language. So thank you for taking that in consideration. As we are not an island nor alone on the roads to sustainable transition, we hope the upcoming event will contribute to the larger debate about socially and environmentally just material cultures in Europe and across. And not to speak much further, I would now like to pass on the word to Aida Pračić, the founder of Kajža and the moderator of today's conversation. And in the name of Krater Collective, artists, designers, permaculture workers, curators, and many others, we wish you a great debate. And I also invite you, dear listeners, from the screens to join our debate with comments and questions, which will be answered hopefully at the end of the conversation at the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaia. I would also like to begin with a thank you to all of you who chose to attend here. I'm really happy that Krater invited me to try and moderate this debate and also to be a part of it, because this is what I consider to be probably one of the most important debates we can have at this moment. So I'm really glad and happy to be part of it. And thank you to all of you who came, and thank you to everyone who is with us via the live stream. Also from my side, an invitation to participate. At the end, there will be a section of Q&A where we will choose some questions from the comments on YouTube and also on Facebook and all the platforms probably where this is being streamed. And we are going to ask our guests the questions that you chose. And also, if you have a specific question for a specific person, don't hesitate to direct it directly at the person. So I would like to first introduce all of the guests to each other and also to the audience on the other side of the camera. So today I'm joined by Nina Kozin, an architect and practitioner who very often uses natural building materials in her work and has also many experience with hands-on building with natural materials. On her right is Mateja Goleš, from the Slovenian National Building and Civil Engineering Institute, and she's a specialist in historic use of natural materials. And then we have Andrej Fideršek, co-founder of Citizens Initiative Zero Waste Žalec and co-author of the project Zero Waste House, which received the new European Bauhaus Award last year in the category Rising Stars. And then Aljaž Celarc, a geographer, intermedia artist, and co-founder of Hiša Mandrova, a traditionally renovated house in the southern region of Slovenia, which now also organizes workshops for building with wood. Of course, Gaja Mežnarič-Osale, designer, co-founder of the non-governmental organization Trajna and part of the Krater Collective. And then to my right, Rok Oblak, founder of the micro company Salto Dionis and ceramic artist, part of the Forbidden Vernaculars project. Daniel Bell, architect and project leader at Atelier Luma, who this year collaborated with Krater on the Forbidden Vernaculars project. Mateusz Čelik, architect, writer, and cultural producer, and state secretary at the Ministry of Culture. Robert Veselko, architect and founder of the architectural studio RVA, which focuses heavily on contemporary architecture built with natural materials. And also Sasha Galonia from the Ministry of Environment and Spatial Planning. So thank you all for being here. Unfortunately, I also have one absence to announce, and that is Tone Pugel, who was supposed to be here, but due to some personal circumstance that arose yesterday, couldn't be here with us. So he's the founder and CEO of Gnezdo. That's a company that is dealing with the import, sale, and implementation of natural building materials in Slovenia, still one of the few. So without further ado, I will start with our conversation, and maybe like an introductory question. I have to maybe tell the viewers that are with us via live stream that we already had a guided tour around Krater, and we already heard some things about the Forbidden Vernaculars project. But still, I would like to ask you, Rok, about this project that was going on here in this past year. There were a lot of workshops, research being done. You dealt with the materials that can be found here at Krater, and especially with earth. And I was wondering, what are the maybe specifics of the soil that you found here? And what are the technical difficulties that you faced when building this pavilion, and also maybe some administrative or legislative difficulties, and how then at the end it all played out so well?
So, hello from my side. Yeah, I think like we were pretty happy that the Biennale decided that they want to do a project with us, and that they wanted to do a project on Krater itself, because first it was planned that it happens on Barje, because like we are working here for almost like 2 years now, and we think it's a really resourceful place, full of like really mysterious materials that we can develop and work with them in our projects. And like one of them definitely being earth, which we didn't explore before in our previous works. So like we were happy to, to work with the Biennale, with an institution to compose and build something like the tea pavilion that we're currently sitting in. Krater, as I said, like is a really resourceful place for materials, and we found, let's say, 4 different types of clay at Krater, and all clays have different properties that we like to explore, like how to use different clays for different purposes. So let's say, for example, we're observing now a little oven that is built of clay, plant fibers, which we used goldenrod, the invasive species, and sand, and this mixture provides a specific, like a pretty good construction for something as a cooking stove. We are sitting on benches that were done from rammed earth, and it was really exciting that we found out that actually this earth that we're sitting on is not mixed with anything. It's just dug out from the side, mixed with water, and rammed in special formworks. We figured this out with the help of Luma and BC Materials, that we hosted a small residency in March. We did a big material research. They helped us how to process and how to manage this, like this material in a productive way, let's say. So we came up with 2 ideas that we will work in 2 different techniques. So the cob is a mixture of plant fibers and clay, and the rammed earth. So later we had an open call for volunteers, and we got like amazing amount of really exciting people on place on Krater. So we really thank them for helping us to build this construction. It happened in June, and it was really fast and efficient. I think we used like 1 week to build the bench and the table. But then what was like more challenging was building the roof for it. The first idea was that we would build it out of tree barks with the help of Aljaž Cilerc. And then some circumstances, like we were too late with resourcing the materials, then we decided to go with another traditional method, which is using wood shingles. So these shingles are made of larch wood that is sourced in Slovenia as well. But yeah, we had to really improvise on how to do it. So it took like 1 month actually to build the roof. The drafting was done also by Altan, the architect, and Aline from Luma. So I think it's a really beautiful construction with a little hole on top to observe the sky and to leave the smoke out of the oven. So yeah, at the end it turned out pretty okay. We kind of look forward of how it's gonna age, because I think the wood is really a live material and it shrinks and expands with rain. And already now we find some malfunctions in the construction. So I think it's nice to observe and to explore wood in this dimension as well when you have to repair it and fix it. And I think it's part of the vernacular, let's say. So I think this is kind of a challenging thing for us in the future. We also like to think that we will use this pavilion for cooking events and socializing, for meetings and things like this. So I think it will be also really nice for us to use it. So we thank the Biennale for making this happen, and we learned a lot. So yeah, I hope it works out well in the future.
Thank you, Rok. So before we actually delve into the administrative obstacles of the use of natural materials in building in Slovenia, I think we first have to actually establish reasons to use them. So today we have a couple of architects or practitioners here who use natural building materials every day in their work. And with natural materials, I think I have to clarify, I don't only mean wood and soil, but also plant fibers or clay or invasive plants, stone, or everything that can be actually classified as locally sourced natural materials. And I would like to ask Nina Kuzin, what do you think are the biggest advantages of using natural materials in your work, and how do you personally usually implement it or implement these materials into your work?
Thank you, Aida, and thank you, Krater, with all its people, for making these things happen, because I completely agree. We need to have these sort of conversations a lot more often, because a lot of bridges have been broken. Why use natural materials? The first part of the answer would be, why not? They've been with us for at least as long as we have, and it seems only logical that we go into the direction of exploring what they can do, what they can offer us, and how we can live with them with quality. And that brings me more to the second part of the answer, which is how do we live with well-being? I think that should be more of a general question to ask ourselves with everything that we do. Is the product that I'm using gonna help me to live a better quality life? The people around me, my neighborhood, the planet itself. It's not just about humans, it's about a lot of other species as well, which we are not helping and evolving, and it's the situation will be difficult for us as well if we continue in this direction. So I think the question is more of what inspires well-being and how do we function in that direction. To me, the question of what are natural materials is not that simple, actually, because it was funny, we had this one project with the undertaking company Žale, and the director at the time said that in the middle of the last century it took a body about 3 days to decompose. Now it takes about 14 days. What are we consuming? What is... So the first skin that we have, the second skin of our environment, what do we put in it? What do we breathe in? How does it influence? There's so many factors that we don't know, so many new elements, new themes, new particles that we discover, which we have no idea how they function and what they will do to us, our system, and our future. So how I try to implement that, I was lucky enough to work 4.5 years in Vorarlberg in Austria, and there there's a lot of impact about natural materials, how to use them. Wood was one of the main resources, and we use that in all sorts of ways, for the floor, for the tables, for the walls, ceilings, roofs, facades, even bathtubs, sinks. That was one of the first inspiring ideas, that we can use all sorts of materials in a very variety of ways if we know how they function and how we can protect them to be able to function better. And then I was happy to be able to participate in a project where we worked with Martin Rauch and Anna Heringer, and the obelisk that they constructed out of clay, we helped design first with the space that we provided for that creation of theirs, and then also polished it. So that was a very lovely experience, how to get in touch with the raw material there in the middle of Austria. Then there was a couple of interesting projects I did in France. One of them was renovating a couple of old houses made of stone, which really reminded me of Slovene, Istrian countryside and Croatian parts as well. So stone there and lime, and also hemp is a lot of times used. So we used that a lot. And then on another project that I worked was tiny houses. So with the local carpenter there, we tried to find as light and as locally available materials as it was possible, and one of them was insulation out of jeans, because that's cotton, which can be restored into something that you can again use, and it's very light. Then a bit more locally, I renovated a house in Croatia, which was a very interesting experiment, because local people that have the knowledge how to use the materials are not so available. So a lot of the things I did myself, some of them including clay plastering and making a wall out of clay, also using stone, of course, as the base, and then refurbishing that stone with lime and that sort of thing. And then more recently in Slovenia, where I try to focus more now, I do a lot of experimental projects and always try to find something in the environment which we can use. And also, that reminds me of a project I did once, which was a very short thing, but a very inspiring, with Isabella Breda and Kenji Matsuki. Because we were walking on the shore, and the local algae produce some sort of eggs which they throw out on the coast, and it's a very big problem for their local community, because they don't know how to deal with them, because they don't decompose so fast. So what Kenji did was take the fibers out of that egg-looking thing, and then we used it in the clay polishing material as well. So that was an inspiring thing. And it's getting used more and more in Slovenia as well. So I hope that, with getting people to talk about more, to see more examples, and to really see how these materials can be used with quality for a long period of times, we can inspire more people to get into the process of using them for their own environment.
Thank you. It's funny that you brought up decomposing bodies because my next question is actually about the lifespan, not of a human, but of a building. And I wanted to ask you, Andrei, about your project, Zero Waste House, which implements a lot of principles to think about the life of the building or of the materials after the life of the building is ended, so after the end of the lifespan. And also you have some techniques with natural materials that allows you to think about zero waste, or about repurposing the materials after they are no longer part of the building. So could you maybe list some of the examples of the techniques that you use, especially in relation to natural materials?
Thank you, Aida. Well, to be honest, the project turned into a different direction because we couldn't get a building permit for the desired idea. So we went into renovation, and I was living in the house, which is like 170 years old, for about 3 years now. And I observed this house, and I kind of got like a certain respect towards it. And I think that especially when I read your articles on your website, I have to like express gratitude to this, because you write very convincing articles about renovation. And in my opinion, this is even closer to the zero waste ideal, since the materials retain their primary function. And what we do now is there are certain elements which had to be changed. For example, the roof structure. I don't know the English words, but these, like staffs which hold on the roof tiles. We took this off, and I just took a hammer and a thing to get the nails out, and I just spent like 5-10 hours getting out all the nails. And now we use these staffs to hold the hemp insulation in place between the roof rafters or beams. So that's one small example. Another example is that we reused some of the old roof tiles as a facade on the auxiliary object, which is now going to be like a summer kitchen kind of thing. And the other stuff we just kind of left in. For example, the beautiful thing about renovating an old house is that you don't know what you're gonna get. It's like a box of chocolates, And once you open it, you see, oh no, this wood is eaten by this certain wood bug, and we are discussing, should we take it out and replace it with new materials, or should we keep it inside? And then one of the boys who was there working on the house, he used the biggest machine, his strongest machine, and the turbo screws, and he couldn't penetrate the wood. It was so hard, even though it was eaten so much already. So that's another example. You need to observe and see what can remain inside the house or what should be replaced. And now we are renovating the attic, so we are making this mesh out of wood. And then on top of it, it's gonna be floor heating and wood again and ceramic tiles. And we learn from our mistakes. I mean, you cannot use everything, but basically my backyard is now like a warehouse of pieces of wood which we haven't identified the use yet. And this is the beautiful thing about wood. Someone asked me once, what is the most sustainable material? And I as a fool said, yeah, it's wood, of course. But no, the most sustainable material is the one which is already inside the building. This is, I remember that later when I was driving back, but so I can say this now. Anyway, but in terms of future uses and different applications, wood is amazing because it can be refurbished and used for another application. Although it's quite labor intensive, but it can be done. Also, in terms of durability, like stone and brick, I mean, the house still stands, and it went through 3 wars and 5 different countries. And for example, hemp as well, it's a super durable material, and it can be reused again. But the problem is that it's imported because we don't have the infrastructure in place here for hemp production. As for the clay and the rammed earth, it's amazing in terms of recyclability. It can be used over and over again. But what all these natural materials have in common is that even though there are no more future uses for them, they can still be safely disposed in the natural environmental cycle, and then the nature takes its own course for them. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, so these were from Nina and Andrei, a couple of quite convincing arguments for the use of natural materials. But in Slovenia, it seems that this practice of building with natural materials is still considered somewhat alternative or fringe. So I was wondering, Robert, why do you think that is? Or what prevents the investors and the builders from using more natural materials in their projects?
Yes, I don't know, maybe, because we were as children indoctrinated by the story with 3 piglings and the wolf, It was, you know how it came out, the smart wolf he built with bricks, and the naive ones they built with straw and wood, and they didn't survive. But no, seriously, I mean, it's really hard to talk general about natural materials and why they are not used. I think we should talk specific about each material, because each material has a different story, why yes or why no. for example, wood is a beautiful natural material, and I wouldn't say that it's not used, or maybe it's underused, but it's more and more used in Slovenia. And but if we talk, for example, about clay or straw, the story is very different. I'm especially interested in the story of clay, you know, because it's really a beautiful material which you can use. Actually, you can dig it under your foot and build it into the house, you know, with no production, with no transport. You can after the life usage, you can use it again. So it's really a very interesting material. And the question is why? Why don't we use it? Well, the answer is first there is. I'm talking about Slovenia, because it's in different countries, there are different contexts. But in Slovenia nowadays, I mean, it's a traditional material. It was used in the past, I don't know, 3 generations back. It was very commonly used, especially in Prekmurje or in the parts where there's a lot of clay. But nowadays, it's a very labor-intense production of this kind of houses. And labor is money, you know, and before it was, you know, the whole village came together and they helped each other. Now in these very individualized times, it's a problem of money, mostly. Because I have a lot of clients which are really enthusiastic and interested in this production way, but I mean, I went through few processes building those kind of houses, and now I know that it's not so easy nowadays in Slovenia to build a house like this. And there are also no companies which would build you a house like this. And this is also an interesting question, you know, because I think the answer is because there's not enough money in this material, because it's there, you can just use it, you know. Nobody gets money from the process and from everything behind the material. This is about clay. The straw is also a very interesting material, which is actually a byproduct from the agriculture. And it's funny, you know, because we have few companies in Slovenia which build straw houses, but they import straw from Austria or Germany because there it's certificated. In Slovenia not. That's actually very similar straw. And this I think we will talk later is also about how to make the materials like official, you know, that they go through the certification processes and that they are actually can be commercially used. And this is also one of the answers that the natural materials who went through this process to become commercialized in a way, they are more accepted by the general public. The materials which didn't went through this process, they're more on the margin. And but it can be also in a way a trap, you know, this certification and everything, because then it becomes an industry, and it's important in the future that we balance these processes somehow.
Okay, thank you. Here actually we had a question for Tone, who is, you know, exactly what you were talking about. But Tone is not here, but he provided written answers. So if you all agree, I'm just going to read first the question and then his answer. Actually, Gnezdo, his company, imports most of their materials because in Slovenia they're not certified. So I was asking, most of your materials are important and cannot be locally sourced. How is that, and what would need to change that? Can you describe some practical issues you had in the beginning when you were establishing your company, and perhaps some that you are still struggling with today? And his answer is, construction is turning the land from green to gray with no return. I think everyone in their field could contribute to reducing the destruction of nature and the irreversible exploitation of natural resources. When renovating old houses, I saw how craftsmen sparingly recycled and used only local, slightly processed materials. This led me to research. As a builder, I was aware that change would only happen if the techniques and materials met the applicable standards. My goal was a change in new buildings. This knowledge did not exist in Slovenia. Restaurators, however, jealously guarded their knowledge. I found materials from my northern neighbors that were tested and could be used in projects in accordance with the Slovenian law. 15 years ago, the first builders needed some security. We were able to ensure this with materials tested in Austria and Germany. Of course, the goal in the future was to produce all this locally, at home in Slovenia. And that's where economics comes in. The market is small. Financing at current consumption is uninteresting for the capital. The change is only possible with greater consumption at home and sales in the Western Balkans. However, the market in these countries, except for DIY enthusiasts, is still completely undeveloped. Masters of natural construction, we work out of love and conviction. Most of us are not entrepreneurs. The country doesn't understand natural construction. It doesn't even know what it is. The only mantra that is constantly repeated is the reduction of energy consumption. But in doing so, energy consumption is completely misunderstood. This is not measured when we live in a building. It is necessary to look more holistically. The energy balance of the building is its entire life cycle. So thank you, Tone, for this answer. And we see that, the legislation is in Slovenia is still underdeveloped. Tone also points out the underdeveloped market and the general misunderstanding of the terms of natural building. And even though in the whole Europe, I think we are now facing a change towards more sustainable building and kind of like greener practices, most of European countries are still left to their own devices, so to say, in regards to their legislation. So, Daniel, you're here with us from France, and what are you developing in France? How do you tackle this problem? And also Atelier Luma has new headquarters, which use a lot of natural and locally sourced materials. And I was wondering, how did you manage to achieve that?
Do I need the mic?
I think so, yeah.
Ah, super. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I should give a little bit of background about about what it is we actually do. So one of our main objectives at the Atelier is looking at the bioregion and developing a new way to look at resources and putting certain resources together in order to make new projects, new materials, et cetera, et cetera. So with a lot of those researches, we've developed materials for construction or design, ranging from structural walls to acoustic or thermal paneling, naturally sourced veneers, varnishes, all sorts of things. So when we talk about, let's say, the construction industry, when we do research projects, we often have it connected to a construction project itself. So we use a construction project in order to push the research and test the material. So in that sense, we have to work alongside the kind of construction team. So building control, engineers, et cetera, et cetera. And normally within that structure, we develop a number of protocols to put a material inside a building, such as what is a technical design, how is it mounted, is it fireproof, how does it age, is it waterproof, does it take moisture or not. So we work with national laboratories then to carry out all of those tests in order to ensure that the material is insurable, so it minimizes risk for the building and project owner. So that's kind of for each specific material. We will have to do a lot of work in order just to make that happen. So it is obviously at a lot of cost to the client in order to do that, and it takes a lot of extra work then to convince certain people that everything will be okay from the beginning. Then in France, they're also quite well developed. They have two sort of framing de facto legislations when constructing in earth called Le Guide de Bonne Pratique. It's like the Guide of Good Practice. And also another one for fibers or straw construction called prepovedanih. So it's like professional straw. And these have been written and tested over the past 2 decades by just advocates that are really trying to push for this to happen in collaboration with government agencies. So now they are recognized as the de facto building regulations when constructing an earth or straw bill. But it still requires, even when you have these framing guides, it still requires a lot of energy to convince a building control office that this exists. We're going to follow these protocols when we do a round earth wall. Then they have to they're not at the stage where they need to be in order to just know that these are the norms and they are to be followed. So sort of it's still arduous to build in these kind of conditions. The other point I would make is on craft. I think you raised the point also. Who builds with natural materials? Are there even the traditions and education existing? In a lot of cases, no, they're not. And it's so often when building with these materials, you have to get together a set of contractors that are able to execute them, you know. So with the project that we're doing in Arles, that meant for us constructing a lot of prototypes, finding a contractor to maybe come from the exterior to teach a contractor that was locally based how to kind of execute this work, and that way to sort of make the project and then transmit knowledge from one place to the other, because the knowledge and expertise is really lacking when it comes to making these things. I would make one point because, so yes, it is possible to build these materials. It takes a lot of energy. France is quite well set up also because it has the regulations, de facto regulations in place. But what I would just add is that I think the question is much more profound, because we are trying to make systems, frameworks to kind of exist within this existing system, which I don't know is the right approach. And I think the question is much more profound and deeper than that, because we end up just sort of trying to fit in with the status quo without really questioning that much more deeper, you know. So this is maybe something for a later discussion.
Yeah, I think we're hopefully we will touch on all of these points, or most of them, education and this profound change of infrastructure and ways of thinking that you're talking about. I hope that we'll be able to talk about all of this today. But for now, I would like to go to the beginning of your answer, where I think in Germany they also have like a guidebook that you can use to build with natural materials instead of like
the Belgians use that.
The Belgians use that. Okay. Instead of like a individual certified materials like we do in Slovenia. So maybe the problem or the biggest obstacle is actually the standardization or certification process itself. And here I would like to ask Mr. Galonia from the Ministry of Environment and Spatial Planning, how do you think that we could approach this problem? Is there a systemic change that we can implement, or is anything going on in regards to this change?
Okay, first, this is administrative sentence, but I need to tell it. It's standardization is totally separate from the state. In ex-Yugoslavia, we had this combined one body that was partly state-owned and governed, but all did all the standardization. Now these are totally separate things. I am involved in a certain way with standardization, so I can provide a sort of answer. Probably the proper standardized way to do this type of construction is not the right approach, I would say. Because it's the standardization is industry getting consensus. And when you're doing it alone, where you're dealing with a material that is from your backyard, there is no industry involved, so they have no interest to do it. You are left alone. And plus, another thing that's interesting about standardization, it's at least 2 steps behind what people want. Because there is an idea, and then there are the first runners that experiment, that they want to take risk, and then comes the first industry that adopts this initially very small idea and makes it an industry, and then there is a competition. And when you have a competition, then at that stage you need standardization to make level playground. Of course, every country uses standardization because otherwise they would have to invent the same system, not done by industry, but done by the state, which would be stupid. And there is another layer of problems that exist. In our legislation, nowhere you will find a word that any material apart from asbestos or something that we know it's dangerous is forbidden. So there is no legal, in this respect, there's no legal obstacles you're not allowed to. But it is more difficult because in our act, I think in the first or in the second article, it's written, buildings, construction works are made of construction materials, other materials, and raw materials. We can use anything we want. But to be sure, when you have a client, you have 2 types of clients. I'm doing something by myself, for myself. I'm willing to take this type of risk. That is much easier. As you've just said, it can be much more expensive if you want then to test something, to be sure to make experiments. But you can do that. If you are doing it for a client that has this wish and has enough resources, that's also not a problem. But when you want to industrialize such actions, then, of course, in our act, in every building act around the world, is safety is the primary concern, and starts with structural safety, and then the fire, and then acoustics, and we have 8 actually, which is a bit peculiar. And if you're doing just the building on itself, you can do it without any certification. But if you want to use a material that you buy somewhere, there is a national and European legislation that says, okay, now we have this link between something that is on the market and something that will be incorporated in the building. And the document that makes things safe is very expensive. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of expertise. We have ZAG in Slovenia, which is a certified body in European and in national level. So if a new producer of a material that's unknown yet, of course, can use this route, but it will take a lot of time and a lot of money, and that's why it's practically difficult, not legally prohibited. Thanks.
Yeah. But I think I'm not entirely convinced because actually I think it's to the same effect, even if something is not de facto forbidden, but there are so many legal and administrative obstacles preventing it from happening, then, even if we pass general legislation that allows us to do something, but we prevent it every step of the way with making it difficult or inaccessible or economically impossible for some people, then it's the result is the same, basically. So actually we had a new building law passed in Slovenia this year, and does this law bring any changes regarding building with natural materials? For question for Mateusz Celik. And where do you see that we could still make some improvements in the building legislation regarding maybe safety and allowing people to maybe grasp this in a wider manner?
I think the law basically acknowledges the natural materials and natural construction. It doesn't really accelerate the use of it, but we should build on that. So it's there. There's an article that describes essential and other elements of construction, and in the same manner as statics or health and safety, now there are also natural materials. And then later it's in more detailed way described what the use of natural materials means, and it means recycling materials, it means reusing the whole buildings, and it means using natural materials. But that's it. That's all that the law says about it. I think to further accelerate the use of natural materials, actually, it's very important to bring change into institutions that are working in the construction sector, not only construction companies, but public institutions. I think we are in a very significant spot, so to say, here also close to the ZAC, the construction institute that in the past was built to accelerate the use of new materials, but metals, composites, of course, in the past. And now it should think about its new role also in this direction. On the other side, we have trade fair, where 10 years ago we were criticized for changing the biennial of industrial design of an manifestation that was promoting consumption and consumer products into a manifestation where we can discuss about the use of natural materials and test the use of natural materials and promote it and showcase how they can be used. And I think this change just needs to spread into other institutions and particularly into government institutions. I think a large, these changes always were implemented through large public projects. And I think, for example, if a public housing institute would promote one of their new housing projects and declare that they will use natural materials and show how they can be used in a wider manner, that would change a lot and also bring more confidence from other people. And this takes a lot of time. We know that wood was probably the first natural materials that started to be used in a wider, let's say, in a wider way, so that there were more developers and investors that started to use it first in individual housing, and only now, I think, after 30 years, we can see large developments, like skyscrapers of 100 meters in Austria or Switzerland that are going to be built. And we still cannot say that let's say, it will sound strange saying traditional modern materials like concrete or iron were replaced by natural materials when we are talking about building and renovating the city. So we need to know that it will take time, but we should take further steps.
So an interesting fact in Slovenia regarding food or materials for food is that if we can prove a resource was traditionally used for food, then it can then it can be used as food even now without going into a long a process of examinations. So Matea, I would like to ask you if you think that a similar legislation maybe could be used also for building materials, because we know that a lot of natural or maybe even exclusively natural materials were used for building in the past. But now this knowledge and these practices are mostly gone or forgotten.
Thank you very much for the invitation in such very interesting roundtable today. For me, is an opportunity to start to open the dialogue with you on this particular interesting field, like natural materials are. Regarding your question, I would like, first of all, I would like to say that I'm not an expert for food and food legislation, so I can very hard to debate about this, but I believe that the food legislation is also very restrictive, like before any food is placed to the market. So as regarding to natural materials and the process how to put new building new material on the market, we have very strict legislation which is connected with two acts. First of one is Construction Products Act, and a second one is Construction Act, and these acts are connected in that way that during Construction Product Acts we are researching, testing and testing new materials regarding to standards, harmonized standards. But if we don't have a harmonized standard like for natural materials, new natural materials, then we used some protocols where can we define technical specification for this kind of products. And of course, when somebody want to use these materials, when plan to use it in the building, then must to follow Construction Acts. So we must it must be sure that material is safe and that is healthy, and yeah, it's because otherwise you cannot be sure that construction will be saved when something happen, like especially natural, especially earthquakes or maybe floods and fire and so on. So we must be sure that materials have all the needed properties regarding to standards for that kind of materials.
Yes, of course, the safety is first, and we already mentioned the three piglets. But I think that, you know, this perspective that natural materials cannot compete with like more recently traditional building materials like brick and concrete in terms of their strength or durability is sometimes only a perception. And maybe one of the other concerns, underlying concerns, that is actually coming from the from architecture itself, is that the natural building materials somehow don't connect well with standards or with the aesthetic of contemporary architecture. And I'm talking, of course, about the very round, like hobbit houses, or the aesthetic of, rammed earth that can be shaped to look like concrete. But, you know, it's not, maybe the market is not ready for it, or it's not being published enough. So I would like to ask you, Robert, what do you think we could do as architects about it? How can we promote the use of natural materials among a wider public?
Well, the answer is very simple: just to start using the natural materials. Yeah, but in a way, this presumption that natural materials are somehow connected to these organic, homemade, self-made houses was maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, but nowadays there are really a lot of examples of really beautiful and good architecture built all over the world from those kind of materials. And it's also an ethical question of architects in general, you know, how to respond to the healthiness of the surroundings where you live in, how to respond to the environment where you build, you know. And this kind of materials are a good answer to those questions. But in a way there are a lot of obstacles to use them, as we were already talking, yeah, but it's opportunity for brave architects, you know, to start doing it, you know, to just push the topic on and to research in the field and just do things as they can, you know. Yeah, this would be the answer. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And also one of the issues that Daniel briefly mentioned before is the lack of proper education in the field for contractors as well as builders, I think. So in the recent months, there was a positive change about this. Slovenia passed a new set of formal national vocational qualifications for building with clay. So that's a positive note, but we seriously lack any official educational programs that would enable a person to build with natural materials. So, Nina, I would like to ask you, do you believe institutional educational programs could offer the skills as well as the promotion of natural building that is chronically lacking? And what are we actually promoting by lacking these kind of official programs? So there are practices that kind of sprout out of it that are maybe even harmful to the field.
Yeah, as we heard, this is a very complex subject that has many obstacles in place. So if we're talking about Slovenia, because this is where we are at the moment, many different subjects led to the point where we are at the moment. I think economics is definitely one of the stronger ones. And then coming back to the question, how to make more knowledge available and how to promote it more and all. I've tried in many various places all over Europe and even in China and other in more or less institutionalized players in this field to get the knowledge, and I came back and I tried to utilize it, and it's very hard. So I think the problem of how we don't utilize it, it doesn't lie only on the fact that I've heard extremely uneducated examples of how things are also in the field of architecture, as in planning, and then in the field of workers themselves, not knowing the materials, the techniques. What good does it do if I learn something about stuff in Vorarlberg, then try to bring it here and nobody knows how to do it? It's very difficult to do that. And then the third aspect is when I go to either municipality or the government combined bodies, there's no allowance to do that. So yeah, I just read an article a couple of days ago that the government signed in November already some sort of initiative that we would like, that it would like the country to go to the circular economics with technical innovations. I was shocked because the practical part of that, I have a beautiful project in near Nova Gorica that I've been working on for a year and a half. The clients really are trying to get sustainable in bringing a new dimension into a rural environment, connect with all the local people. I mean, everything that we talk about that is nice and fine, they've got it there. I've been there as an architect with this project for a year and a half, and everything that we've gotten so far is a no to every single step of the things that we're trying to implement, get permit for, and to get this sort of thing in practice. So yeah, again, coming back to the question, how to get more knowledge, also to show people that you can actually use it. Because for me, it's a waste of my time, if not life, if I study something that I cannot implement in practice then it's no use to do that in the first place. So, of course, institutionalizing the knowledge and making clear steps, what is functional about it, what it serves for, what it looks like. It doesn't need to be all these organic shapes, as Robert was also saying before, that there's very many ways how you can use natural materials, and it doesn't have to combine with aesthetics alone, or with, there's so many beautiful aspects to each single material. And if we make it more known and more rational sometimes, and even more scientific, yeah, I think we have a better chance of making this more publicly acceptable also, because not everybody is willing to live in a hobbit house. Me included. I wanted straight lines, and this is why I built the house myself in the end for certain parts, because I couldn't find a person that would not do the aesthetical things, which in my opinion still are aesthetical, but just in the other direction, with using clay, for example. So yeah, there's many directions where we need to go in order to make this a more sustainable approach in reality, because yeah, the problem is there's no money in it. That's why. And it all stops there at a certain point.
Yeah, for now it seems that enthusiasts and people who would really like to deal with natural materials are left to their own devices. And Aljaž, you are a geographer by education, but you renovated and rebuilt your house yourself with wood. And I was wondering, whether did you acquire this knowledge of woodworking, and how can maybe a practice of sharing knowledge, like a mentorship approach, be helpful in promoting the use of natural materials?
Well, thanks a lot. I have to say first that I was really excited coming here and as an artist, professional artist, to see this performance. So thank you to Krater and the team for inviting me. Where should I start? I mean, it's like this debate is really huge. But for us, you know, natural materials, where I'm speaking about me and my partner, was a logical choice. Because, for example, wood has been around for centuries. So if you observe old buildings, how they were built, the traditions, the shapes as well. You know, the how our traditional architecture in our region is shaped makes a lot of sense. So what we did in our house was to take the really traditional old wooden house, and we rebuild it in a way that it's today like energy efficient. It's also our artist studio, and it also is incorporated in our food production system, which we have at our homestead. Quite similar to how it was done in the past, because our house has a really interesting story that there was a shed for a cow in the basement, and in the attic there was a hayloft. So, well, today we don't live like that any longer, but we have like on the south face of the building a huge, free glass houses, which we use to overwinter animals like chicken, poultry, and we have plant starts there, and it all this dimension of observing how the houses, architecture, and how architecture fits into the landscape, of course, comes from my geography background, because I try to understand the natural cycles, energy flows in the landscape, try to implement it in the building practice as well. It's not something that it's actually something that everyone can learn, and that's our message that we try to spread through our Hishamandra project, is that by observing, by having your mind open, and your eyes on the watch, you can learn a lot from the already existing things, not like buying some ready-made solutions, but really try to understand first your needs, what you need. So for us that's like our artist studio, growing space, and living space, and then making it happen. And in that sense, it helps a lot. But like about apprenticeship and also informal education is something that really comes to play if you're a learning junkie. That's how we describe ourselves. If we have a talent, then it's not like talent for building or shaping, but it's talent to learn stuff. And that's what we use to teach others, because we host like 1 day wood workshop, basic woodworking shop, then we host a 3-day traditional timber framing workshop, where we teach people together with a master craftsman to really like make wooden joints that are traditionally tested without any additional modern materials. And that can be used as, you can use that in a shed these days. It's not like we expect that people who visit our workshops will build their own house. Of course not. Or maybe someday. But it's a start of something. You can at least do something. That's the message we try to bring to the front. And for us, natural materials in that sense are essential, because they go like from our not food forest, but like agro pasture, silvopasture. It's where we harvest trees, and also grow our animals there. We harvest trees there, and then I can transport them like 100 meters to my house, use a heaving axe to make a beam, and then I can make a shed. It's that, and that's a way of living for me. So I hope I answered the question. That was really broad, but yeah.
Thank you. But for now, we are still speaking only about really small-scale projects, I think, about individual initiatives and people who are trying to make a difference on their own. And I'm wondering, how is it possible maybe to encourage the use of natural materials also in more urban areas? So not only in rural areas where they seemingly belong, and also the use in public buildings. And then that maybe is a question for Mateusz Celik again. So when can we expect to see more use of natural materials in public buildings?
I don't know if I have an answer to that, but a part of the answer probably lies in the word bravery that Robert used before. And there's a quote that's probably not very famous by Edward Raunecker when he was building the Square of the Revolution, now the Square of the Republic, on the on the spot of the garden of a former monastery. And he said that there's a certain level of bravery needed to pour concrete into a monastery garden. And today there's a certain level of bravery needed to use clay or wood into a large public building, I think. And I mentioned institutions before, and I'm repeating that that's really essential to reform and transform institutions, because they offer public institutions, they offer essential support for those who are brave, but and do need support to make these changes. We see that there are larger buildings built with wood now, also with clay. They are making prefab, rammed earth slabs already, and larger constructions. And I think that there is trend that this will go on. So we should be brave and also believe that it's possible.
So we have the initiative from bottom up. Now we need the initiative from top down.
It should always be both ways.
Both ways, right. And also one of the initiatives, bottom-up initiatives, that is active on a small scale in one of the smaller Slovenian towns of Žalec is the Zero Waste Žalec. Andrej, how are you dealing with the local community, or maybe, you know, the local administration? How are they responding to your efforts, or is there any response from them? Do you have support on a local scale, at least, with your initiative?
Well, I always emphasize that we are talking about building structures and houses, and it's also very important to build communities. And this is something which we forgot in these modern, fast-paced times. And well, it's not easy, because most of the people, they don't care about the environment. And this is the mindset which we adopt when we go into various actions and initiatives which we do. So we try to also include like people, because I think that nature and humans, that we are inseparable, like we are basically one. And through this, we then try to connect with people on local level with various things. Like, for example, our latest project was providing infrastructure for collection of used cooking oil on the streets. And before that, people didn't know what to do, and it clogged the sewer system. Yeah, thanks. It clogged the sewers and everything. It was horrible. But now all the old ladies are so grateful for this, because they can finally, you know, pour the oil somewhere, and they also realize that it becomes a new product afterwards. So it's quite a good thing. And this might sound a little bit bizarre, but we live in times where we don't know our neighbor's shoe size anymore. And this just means that we are like so enveloped in consumerism that our shoes, our clothes, they don't get passed down the generations anymore like they used to back in the day. I mean, it was also because of material shortages, you know. We all know the infamous thing that when you had to, if you wanted to have jeans, you had to go to Trieste to get them. But now we try to like bring this kind of concept back, and we organize various exchanges of like clothing and other stuff. And we are trying very hard to get a place for the tool library, but it's difficult, you know. The local administration, it's always like you're like kind of like Don Quixote fighting battles with windmills. But it it works when you have money behind it, when you have like projects, you know. Then they are very eager to get into something like that. Otherwise, it's just like a constant uphill battle. But it's very nice to like see positive reaction from people of what you're doing, and kind of brings back a little bit of solidarity. And I think that like in this socio-ecological degrowth world, we're gonna need a lot of that, and also adopt like a cosmo-local approach, you know, because it's not just our communities all around the world. And we might be able to use local materials, but we should be able to learn from the entire globe, from everyone, and then put this knowledge back.
Yeah, I think sometimes providing information is enough, you know, for the local community to kind of really activate, because they don't activate because they don't know how to do it. And once you show that there is a possibility, I think there's a lot of times there is a willingness from communities to participate. Actually, one thing is the knowledge, but the other thing is the for people to be able to access natural materials. So a lot of times natural materials, because there are new techniques being developed all the time, and because they're unstandardized, they are also only adapted at a small scale, they can be quite expensive. So, Aljaž, this is a question for you. How do you think that material democracy could look like in Slovenia today, and how to make sure that, you know, these good practices, natural materials, are accessible in all parts of the society? A difficult question, I know.
Oh yeah, I mean, material democracy is a really nice word. Although I would like to start with with a little story. You know, that before Second World War, a 36% of Slovenia was covered by forest, and the rest was arable land. So not just arable, but agricultural land like pastures and stuff. And now it's 60%. And according to, you know, the climate and stuff, 97% of Slovenia would be covered by woods. So what happens here, like going from 63 to 60%, so the forest almost doubled in size, but the quality really plunged, the quality of the wood. So today we're working mostly with wood from like second growth forests. Well, sorry about not including all the other natural materials, but just, you know, I'm specializing in wood. So what we have is like timber that doesn't have the quality. So that's why we have to process it to make like these glued beams, like prefabbed beams and stuff. It's just the reason that we don't have the old growth forests any longer. It's like we have really like low quality wood, and that introduces another, you know, dimension, that there has to be a manufacturer to certify it. There has to be someone there to do it for you. You can't do it at home. If you do it, if you take a piece of lower quality wood, you know, it will disintegrate faster, and you will be unhappy, because, you know, then you will blame the wood, even though it's not the wood's fault. It's the fault that it's not sufficient quality. And that's something that where, you know, this as a society we come in. We do have the because we did that to the ecosystem of the forest, like taking materials, shrinking it down, like now it's coming back. We do have the obligation almost to try to understand how to help it grow back better, stronger, and that also means that the trees will, you know, trees will grow into better quality timber that we can harvest in the future sustainably. But a lot of questions about, you know, material democracy, of course, comes to the fact that, you know, most of the time people who use wood for building materials or would like to build, including myself, we do have to buy the timber or natural materials. Like I had to buy wood wall insulation. I had to buy from Germany because there's no one like manufacturing here. So meaning that, yeah, it's just one problem, you know. But in the future, what we would need, I think, is a system where, you know, wood forests would be more, you know, in common, would serve more the common good. So just one brief anecdote, like really quick one. Like in 2013, there was a big hailstorm in Slovenia that affected 50% of the forests. Like trees were broken down, and at that time, so much of the spruce tree, because spruce tree is not native here, but anyway, spruce tree was cut down and just sold to Austria, Germany, in a really short period. While if we had a system where, you know, so lumber mills would take the excess timber, just mill it down to boards, store it somewhere, we could release it in a long run, just, you know, like release it when needed. And that would sort of ponder the prices, because prices like 3 months ago were sky high, incredibly high, and now they're plunging back because similar, you know, windstorm happened in Austria, and Austria doesn't buy the excess timber. So it's like, you know, we would need to think that how, you know, natural materials would be separate from the, you know, capitalist speculative logic in a certain way. And that's the only way to achieve the regenerative future.
So one of the topics that Krater and especially Trajna also focus on are the invasive plants. I was thinking about this when you said that spruce is not native to Slovenia, but you know, for invasive species, which spruce is not, but for invasive species, the European policy is aimed at exterminating these kinds of species, and which this is considered the most sustainable thing to do. But actually, Trajna is trying to prove that many local communities could actually benefit from other kinds of strategies regarding invasive plants. Gaia, could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think like when we're talking about invasive plants, we're fighting so many fights, because first of all, a lot of people, when we start with, don't actually understand what invasive plants are. So when already approaching to the communities, like first, like we need to kind of create this sort of public awareness of the species. And then when people actually understand what the species are, then we come to the second problem, which is the way they're kind of mediated in the public media, let's say, and how they're circulating in the conversation. And this is, as you already kind of mentioned, that these are like the most harmful species that we need to eradicate, we need to destroy. In some other countries also put a lot of pesticides on top of the invaded soils. So nothing would grow there, for example, for 3 years or more. So basically, the kind of public image that we're creating about those green beings, is like another struggle that we're fighting against when we're trying to work on our projects. And then, like, of course, the third one would be what a lot of today's participants kind of mention is when we're already starting to introduce them as a viable, renewable resource. For example, we had more experience with initiating a paper production, but also in a way Krater came out of this idea that we want to show and learn together with the community how to live in this sort of anthropogenic environments where invasive species are kind of our companion species. So what kind of learnings can we create out of such spaces, and how we can symbiotically, in a way, work with them But yeah, to go back to the point is basically the third obstacle, I would say, it's really when you're trying to think of this sort of new economies that could sprout out. Of course, like these kind of economies cannot be capitalist based economies. And if you would like to frame the practice in another way, like living within the capitalism, again, presents quite a challenge to work with. So, for example, now with Trajna, we're still kind of commercially using the Not With Paper brand in a sense of that we would like to, the way we framed, for example, our economy was that we're running Krater as a public space, and then with the Not With Paper, for example, we would like to actually earn the money to cover our kind of voluntary work that we produce, and this is the model we have in mind. It's not functioning in its perfection at all, but let's say that this is the vision, and if we don't kind of change the ground structures of how we are operating within our economies, I believe somehow it's then very difficult also to speak about all of those materials as viable alternatives, because we're just again like bumping into the same problem of extractive economies. But yeah, on the positive note, of course, like those species are producing incredible amounts of biomass. They're the pioneering species, which means that they kind of pop up in the spaces, degraded spaces, would normally, like other species, wouldn't come, and they start the process of regeneration. That's why they produce such big amounts of biomass. That's also why they produce such amounts of seeds to attract other pollinators to kind of start this process of life again. And for that reason, like one interesting thing is that they produce, they start to produce good humus, basically, so they kind of regenerate the soil. And the other thing, what is also interesting is for us then, for the humans, is that it produces the kind of big amounts of biomass that we can use, for example, whether for the wood, for the paper, but also in a way for food. And maybe this is also how I started the story with Japanese knot. It was a really interesting field trip that we did around Mao, actually, the Museum of Architecture and Design, and we've invited late Dario Cortese, to take us around and to show us what's edible in the urban neighborhood, such as Fujine. And then he kind of introduced us to Japanese knotweed and said basically, that this is one of the most invasive plants in the world, but at the same time, it's like really like a plant with high amounts of vitamins, antioxidants, and really nice kind of healing properties, so to say, that a lot of people don't know about. And for example, if we would want to sell Japanese knotweed on the Slovenia or EU market, we would again be fined, let's say. So some cooks are then trying to find another way out, and they're calling Japanese knotweed as Japanese rhubarb and inventing different kinds of, roundabouts to still do it. But yeah, it's a complex story. But yeah, maybe just to mention, to finish it up, we're drinking the tea from the roots of Japanese knotweed today, so hopefully your immune systems will be boosted after the session.
Yes, I think that now in the past couple of answers we've been steering towards the topic that is maybe in all of our minds, and that's the economy, or the existing systems, existing infrastructures that kind of don't allow us not only to build with natural materials or apply them, but also to think about them actually as a viable source or a viable product. So, Daniel, you already mentioned before that these infrastructures and systems are kind of what is the problem. And one of the reasons I can identify for that is the scale of their use. So they're always used in small projects on a small scale, and they're not being adapted to
these overgrown systems or infrastructures that are in place for other materials. So, and we also heard from Robert that no one is making money because of natural materials, which is, of course, a problem. So, is it, concrete, for example, has a strong lobby, and so does brick, and so do many other materials, I think. And do we need a lobby for natural materials, or how can, faced with these powerful lobbies, how can natural materials ever win?
Strange mic without any sound. Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to start with that question. The first thing, I wouldn't frame it as winning or losing, in this kind of in this type of logic. When I would just draw up one point about natural materials, there's no money in it. Maybe we'll come to that kind of a bit later. But what I would say is that, first of all, on the discussion about sustainability and regenerative practices and everything else is so far away from being sustainable, so far away that we really need to establish a kind of, what does that mean, sustainable, so that everybody's kind of talking about the same thing, because to different people it means different things, But sustainability is, not doing no damage, being kind of neutral, and everything we do inflicts damage. So, for me, any discussions about regenerative practices belong in sci-fi books, because we're just so far away from even getting to the first step that the second step is even further away. So, for me, I always have that in my mind, to be careful about how we use different words and what it means. On the second point about, could systems be adapted in some sense to allow for a kind of material revolution to happen? Of course, I mean, that's quite easy, Plenty of examples in history. Second World War, whole economies were changed temporarily to make really complex objects like planes, rockets, clothing, just a whole economy changed for 6 years on a completely different way. COVID, car manufacturers were making devices for respiration. So that part of it is quite simple, Of course, things can be adjusted if there's the motivation and will to kind of adjust them, which isn't quite there at the minute. I don't know when it will be there. Yes, more things are starting to happen little by little, but it's really extremely niche. Earth building or construction in straw bales or things like this is still quite niche. But I think what I would just say at the end of it, and sort of about the point of, there's no money in it, so to speak. Well, of course there's money in it, If everybody is doing it, then there is money in it. Often the problem you will face, if you want to build a wall in rammed earth versus concrete, the rammed earth wall will cost you two or three times the amount. Why? Because people, and it's a little bit more complex. Why do we build in concrete? Because it's simple, it's quick to do, it's quick to learn. And after the Second World War, when so many other men were killed, the knowledge kind of drained away also. So we needed these quick solutions in order to rebuild Europe. So that's a little bit where concrete got its debut. So yes, we can talk about lobbying, but there was kind of real factors involved, which meant concrete was a rational thing to do at that time. But I would end on kind of maybe something slightly more positive, is that with all these projects, with this pavilion, with the projects that we do in the Atelier, and also BC, who were involved in this pavilion, working with Crater, we try and demonstrate, we demonstrate through the act of building, the act of doing, how these things are, how they feel like, how they smell, how it is to be inside it. And when you do that, like has been done here, the conversation is is much simpler then, you know, because you're talking about real things that are touchable, that we can say, well, yeah, it acts like this or reacts like that, and then you're more easy to convince people, which is the other part of it, you know. Things, once people experience what it is like to be in a natural building, it changes everything, because, yeah, I mean, a regular house is just full of toxins, your pillow, fire retardants that are kind of in the environment and all sorts of things. But when you build naturally, it's a different vibe, you know. And if it's beautiful, people are open to that. And it's an easy argument to win, actually, in the end.
Well, thank you for the positive note at the end. I think we're going to conclude soon. We had some more questions planned, but we're running out of time. So I would just like to ask Rok again about the future of the Forbidden Vernaculars project. What are you planning to do in the following months? How is this project going to evolve, and how do you continue to connect all of the institutions in Slovenia with this project?
Yes, well, as I mentioned before, it was kind of fun to do it, and now we have it. So what do we want to do with it? Like, we ended up with the pavilion. We brainstormed for some ideas in a sense that we want to make like a vision of a center of a hub of discussions like this, where we can talk about problems and issues that we as designers are facing when we're making projects, and also when we invite other designers and practitioners to Krater to make their own ideas, and they project their problems to us, and maybe we can launch some kind of a conversation about this, about topics that we just kind of discussed today. And in a more practical sense, like, we just want to use the infrastructure as for a socializing, cooking events, and on the other hand, like, use the institution of the Biennale as some kind of public, that people get to know Krater and what we do here, because it's a pretty niche topic, the natural materials development. People are not aware that this is something that can contribute to, a better future. So I think it's important for us that people in Slovenia and elsewhere, that they get to know what we're doing, and maybe they come over and get new ideas about like what they want to do in their own local environments. So that would be kind of nice, I think, thing to do. But in terms of international, we probably want to connect different institutions around the world who do similar things, and maybe do some collaborative projects together, just to share knowledge and to get our experiences together. I think, as I said, like, it's a pretty niche topic, so we have to connect and see how we can help each other working this.
Maybe Gaia, if you would like to add something.
I will now do a little bit of the PR for Krater, what was still left out. But basically, we're organizing another tea ceremony assembly on 24th of September at 12 p.m. Again, here at Krater. So we really want to invite all designers, creatives, craftsmen, everyone who is interested in working with natural materials to join us at the tea ceremony. This time it won't be streamlined, so it will be more of a non-formal conversation, so we can continue the discussion in another setting. So we can only host 10 visitors, so please do write at info@trajna.com as soon as possible, because the spaces are limited. And then I would also like to invite you on the 28th and 29th of September. We're organizing, in collaboration with an architect, Danica Sretinovic, a conference called the Feral Palace Conference, in the response of the lack of understanding of why these ecosystems such as Krater should be sort of implemented in the administrative frameworks. And further on, yes, I just wanted to mention that basically we live in extremely uncertain and precarious times, so it's like even the word planning seems almost a bit unreachable. But for sure, I think Krater will continue developing tactics and ways of introducing our collective as some sort of a relevant research and experimental creative collective that is able to think and produce and prototype regenerative production systems, let's say. And yes, maybe just to add up, in case some of today's partners or listeners would be interested to follow up to this conversation, we would be happy to speak about how we could continue the work together. It's really an open invite. We are enthusiastic to kind of share our energies and continue the path of kind of sustainable transition. And I just wanted to mention also why we decided what was another reason to decide to organize this roundtable, not only to kind of have the conversation, which is again like extremely important, but also to be able or to kind of create some sort of a tool for advocacy for people who want to engage in such practices, so they can use also the recording as a way of how they're maybe entering in the conversation with like public bodies and policymakers and whoever they want to reach out, and to kind of really show and demonstrate that there is like a vivid community of people who want to work towards a better change. And yes, so please use the recording according to your needs. And I don't know, maybe this here I will really stop, but somehow I think it's important to say that Krater for the whole of the biennial was more or less, or the Krater community working or like putting a lot of working hours, voluntary working hours, to make this incredible event, and building together with all of the like BC architects and as well as Luma, Atelier Luma possible. So we have established on our webpage a certain section where you can donate and support us financially, so we can continue with our work and continue with opening questions and sharing the critical approaches. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gaia. I think it's actually 2:00, but we received some questions. Do you think that we still have time to read them out, or should we skip?
Maybe to ask Mateusz, how are you with the time? To go.
Okay.
Okay. So is there maybe a question for Mateusz?
They are not directed specifically,
Okay.
so I just wanted to suggest that maybe if somebody feels that they could answer the questions, then please do so, and we'll hand you the microphone. But if anybody needs to leave, of course, you can do so now. So the first one is actually from Jasper van der Linden from BC Materials, who is asking everyone. So earth and other natural materials have a huge charm thanks to the craft that is put into the making of buildings. The scaling up through industrial scale production risks losing parts of the manual crafts and social qualities that are involved in the creation process. How can we keep these qualities while scaling up and becoming mainstream? Thank you, Mateusz.
Thank you.
Who would like to answer that? Maybe Daniel again?
Could you just read out the end of the question? Sorry.
How can we keep these qualities while scaling up and becoming mainstream? So manual crafts and social qualities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a difficult question. I mean, if we compare something like, I mean, generally a building site is a horrible place to be. it's a super harsh environment. People are paid normally, generally not a good wage. Planning and schedules are very restrictive and very intense. So people on a building site are normally generally not very happy, you know, and it's not a nice environment to be in. People that work with natural materials, it's a lot different, you know. And the atmosphere you would have inside a building site when people are like doing rammed earth or earth plasters is a different atmosphere, you know. And I asked somebody anecdotally who was doing a BTC wall, a wall in earth block. I asked him a question about this. How was he feeling in the building site? And he said, yeah, I mean, it's fine, but if I stayed here for another 4 weeks, I would feel that pressure and I would become as pissed off and as unhappy as those guys, you know. So I think there's a conversation to have about how we build and what is that, you know, because there's a whole part of it that we're forgetting, and it's the human aspect of it. Yes, we can build with natural materials, but under what circumstances, you know, which is one of the parts that is rarely looked at and forgotten. So for me, the charm of it, we have to think about the whole structure and the whole performance of actually making a building, and how does that happen? Because the reality is, at the minute, it happens in not a generally very nice way. So if we get that part of it right, then I think we will maintain that kind of aspect that makes these materials much nicer and more noble to sort of work with. So the scaling up of it is it's the tipping point. But how we do that and under what system is the question that we have to answer. I don't know if that answered that question or not. I don't think so.
Okay. I read the second question in the meantime, and actually I think we already answered it to some extent, because it is asking about the scale of building with natural materials. So a private building or an individual house compared to neighborhoods or public buildings, and then also about how we can adapt existing systems and infrastructures to new use for natural materials. So I think we kind of already have that covered, with which I would like to conclude this event, and thank you again all for coming. I think we are getting some snacks now, burek made from Japanese knotweed.
What else?
So I'm looking forward to that, and thank you for everyone who has been watching, who has been with us for these past 2 hours. Thank you, and I hope that this is not the end, but the beginning of a wider debate on natural materials, and that we will speak again in different circumstances. So thank you, and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you, Ida.
Okay, so I'll be the guinea pig.
Po slovensko kaj jem? Ok, pa sem prav glasno.
Sirov.
Sirov japonski dresnik.
Posebna slovenska sorta. Nabrana prila.
To pa je to peko? Jaz sem se zanimal tale burek.
Tako dobivamo nove podpornike.